Chapter 271. At this moment, he was like a devout believer, readily accepting the divine punishments bestowed upon him. He placed the golden token on his chest and loudly recited the content of the oracle. In the past, when the creator Prometheus committed a grave sin in the divine court, he did not deny his guilt. The divine king judged him, and as punishment, withdrew his blessings from humanity. Now, the divine king has given the first woman, Pandora, to another participant in the creation of humans, the afterthought Epimetheus, and also bestowed upon him a gift from Hades. Hades cautioned him. This gift contains the sufferings and calamities of the mortal realm, and you must not open it. Yet, in the end, they were released. So, someone asked anxiously, High Priest, are all the epidemics we've recently encountered originating from Pandora, from that woman? Yes. His expression growing graver, Mammon nodded slightly. Then is the deity sending down oracles to help us out of these calamities? Someone else asked. No. The divine king's words are absolute. When Hades' gift was opened in the mortal realm, it was as if he permitted their existence. This cannot be undone. As for the oracle's final content, holding up the golden token, Mammon began to speak. The divine king rules the sky and the earth. The sea emperor rules the seas and storms. Hades presides over the underground mines and the underworld. Because of humanity, Hades has been able to spread his majesty upon the earth, which has deeply displeased the sea emperor. Thus, he will today rectify this error. Rectify the error, you mean? Exactly. Looking at the humans before him, Mammon spoke calmly. We are that error. Above the expansive and limitless ocean, as calm as ever, was the sea area near the Sea Emperor's palace, with a faint divine force encircling the surroundings. Ever since Poseidon claimed this place from the line of the ancient sea god, there have been no calamities here, as he is the master of storm and tsunami. Even the latter, having been forged into a divine artifact by the Cyclops, did not affect its master's use. However, on this day, beneath this tranquil sea surface, a significant number of shadows had unknowingly gathered. Above the sea, the waves too were lifting up a figure. With a human torso and a fishtail, looking very young and bearing some resemblance to Poseidon, that was the Sea Emperor's firstborn and Amphitrite's son, the demigod Triton. At this moment, he was holding a blue trident in his hand. An invisible force was flowing through the weapon, and the ocean's depth and anger seemed to manifest on this divine artifact. Such a powerful force, this divine artifact. Is this what it feels like to be a true god? I was so weak in the past. Before a true deity, I was nothing but an existence that could be easily killed. Intoxicated, this was the first time Triton had felt the power to shake the seas. In the Third Era, as more and more mortal things were born, deities began to frequently produce offspring that were not eternal, and he was one of them. As the Sea Emperor's firstborn, Triton had noble blood but not matching strength. Even though most deities treated him with courtesy for his father's sake, he still felt they were mocking him, scoffing at his weakness, laughing at him for being mortal and killable. This made him crave power all the more, and at the same time, hate mortals even more. It's a pity that I can only possess this divine artifact for a while. With some regret, immersed in the sensation of boundless power, Triton couldn't help but lightly swing the trident in his hand. The next moment, wherever his gaze reached, 100-meter-high waves rose from nothing, with everything happening so effortlessly. With the divine artifact in hand, Triton even felt his senses infinitely extended, as if this vast expanse of sea had become part of his body, which could surge just by a thought. This is how true gods wield their authority. They don't need to know how to do it, they just think, and the things of their authority respond to them. This is also a rare power for deities at sea. Otherwise, with the trident forged from Poseidon's tsunami godhood, it could shake 1,000 miles of coast. This is the value of divine artifacts. In the hands of the powerful, they can become even mightier, but in the hands of the weak, they still possess fundamental power. Although the trident of the Sea Emperor lacks quite a bit compared to a high-grade artifact due to Poseidon's realm being too sparse, it suffices to grant Triton the divine authority of a true deity. Ah, come. With a hearty laugh, Terry raised the trident high above. Instantly, the ocean's currents heeded his call, with wave upon wave churning up. And amongst the waves, the dark shadows that had been lurking below the sea's surface began to surface one after another. Some were the offspring of Pontus, the primordial sea god, father of the sea monsters. Others were creatures that had been imbued with the blood of marine deities in numerous divine wars, gaining greater strength from the divine blood, and instinctively obeying the progeny of powerful deities. Stroking the trident, Terry reveled in this commanding sensation, his only regret being the low intelligence of the sea monsters. However, that was sufficient. Grasping the divine artifact, Terry pointed it forward and said with a buoyant spirit, "Follow the waves. Kill every living thing you see." No, wait. Suddenly remembering his father's advice, Terry frowned but still retracted his words. There were two he couldn't kill, for the Divine King had other plans for them. Terry had no objection to this. After all, they were demigods, not like those lowly mortals. Then let me say it again. Apart from the two demigods named Pitha and Deucalion, kill every living thing you see. With a grin, Terry mimicked his father's tone, oozing with killing intent, and said, "Leave not one alive." As his words ended, under the power of the divine artifact, towering waves surged toward the land. Among the roaring, the sea monsters too advanced forward. On the earth, without the enhancement of divine power, mere seawater might not be able to drown all mortals. But with these monsters, it was a different story. Terry believed he would accomplish this task very well. Even at this moment, he was already considering how to dawdle a bit longer. The destruction of humanity, I can't do it too quickly. Sitting on a throne formed of seawater, behind the multitude of sea monsters, Terry pondered in silence. If I kill them all too fast, I won't own the divine artifact once the task is over. Such an opportunity doesn't come by often. I should enjoy it a little longer. Meanwhile, in the spirit realm, Lane was explaining the various aspects of the world to Bai. He was talking about the third layer of the spirit realm, telling the young dragon that as a dragon governing the realm of the heart, it was very suitable for her to be active there in the future. Part of the spirit realm, yet intertwined with the hearts and dreams of all beings in the world. I could witness the variegated aspects of the world and understand the love and hatred between living beings there. If she was interested, she could also travel within the dreams of living beings and come into contact with reality to experience the sensations of mortal life. Why have you stopped? Suddenly, the young dragon, who had been listening with great interest, lifted her head and looked at Lane not far away. There, Lane had stopped speaking at some point and had stood up from his seat. I have some matters to attend to." With a smile, Lane then cautioned, "You stay here by yourself for a while. Just remember, if anyone comes here other than me, do not pay them any attention. They won't notice you." "I understand." The clear, childlike voice echoed in Lane's mind, and the young dragon then lay down on a dragon egg, boredly closing her eyes. Seeing this, Lane chuckled and then casually picked up the black cloak that was draped over the chair. Promise made must be kept. Humanity was about to be destroyed, and now he needed to visit the mortal realm. It was just unknown what direction the end of bronze humanity would take this time. Chapter 272 Historians. Without locking in on a location, without previewing it beforehand, once he was prepared, Lane simply took a step, leaving everything to the unknown. So, when he emerged from the spirit realm into the dwelling place of humans, what laid before him was a door. This seemed to be the interior of some human structure, with the bronze door dividing it into inside and outside sections. It was clear that there should have been guards here, but now the place was completely empty. History. Since everything here originally stemmed from me, is that why I've come here? Though his action was random, in the mythic world, there was no true randomness. Being able to come here meant that this place had some faint connection to Lane. After surveying his surroundings, he reached out to push the door open. The portal, heavy enough to require the combined strength of several men to open, swung apart with ease, revealing the steps behind it. It appeared to be a very tall building, which wasn't common among modern humans. Strolling in, under the light of the lamps on either side of the staircase, Lane headed towards the top of the building. Click! Grind! The sound of a bronze blade scraping against stone echoed in the high space, where an old man with a face full of wrinkles continued his work. He was very old, one of the oldest among the first humans created by Prometheus, and his life was nearing its end. Judging by the arrangement on this floor, there should have been many people here in the past, tasked with guarding and preserving these items, and he was the overseer. But now only he remained. However, sitting in his chair, the old man seemed oblivious to the changes around him, quietly carving away at the object in his hands. In his palms, the smooth stone tablet gradually filled with patterns and text. Looking closely, these patterns formed a tall pillar of fire. A man with an indistinct face was bound to the pillar, surrounded by onlookers. In midair, a goddess with a scale in her left hand and a sword in her right watched over everything.
Top? Top, top.
Outside, footsteps gradually approached from afar. The old man didn't react. On the table beside him, numerous parchment scrolls were arrayed, inscribed with tiny script. These were once considered one of bronze humanity's greatest treasures, but now, they were nothing more than useless decorations.
Top?
Finally, the footsteps halted behind the old man. The shadow cast on the table in front of him reminded the elderly guardian of the newcomer's presence. Yet he showed no response to this unexpected visitor. "If you have business, please wait a moment, cough cough." The man's hands kept moving as he said slowly, "Whether you allow me to record these things or not, please wait until I'm finished. Then you can take it away as a small ornament. If you could grant me this humble request, I will be grateful for your kindness in the last moments of my life." The old man was dying. Lane could see that. He had contracted the plague. With the current medical knowledge of bronze humanity, his death was certain. Even without the plague, given his age, he wouldn't have lived much longer anyway. It was like an ancient saying buried in the depths of memory. The people are not afraid of death. How can death be used to frighten them? The old man was like that now. If it weren't for the few things he still wanted to do, Lane even thought the man might not care about his arrival. But observing the stone engraving steadily nearing completion, intrigued, Lane still asked with interest, "You all? What do you think I am?" After climbing over 100 steps and reaching the top floor of the building, Lane also understood the purpose of this place. In the spacious room were hundreds of wooden racks, on which creations containing written records were stored. This was where humans collected knowledge. They recorded the technologies of humans from the previous era, passed down by the Creator, and stored them here. As for the old man in front of him, he seemed to be the one in charge of organizing them. "You must be a god," as the young people said. "The gods are going to destroy humanity. They wanted me to leave with them, but where could I go? I won't live much longer anyway, so I simply stayed here. If bronze humanity can continue, they will eventually return one day, and perhaps they will see something I have left behind. If bronze humanity is to be extinguished, then it doesn't matter where I stay." Having finished the illustration, the old man started to carve letters into the stone tablet. Watching this scene, Lane felt a sense of déjà vu. Young people? Although the ages of bronze humanity do differ at creation, the actual time you all have existed is quite similar. Some were born middle-aged, while others were children. Moving beside the old man, Lane looked at the stone tablet. "The length of life is not the standard for measuring youth or old age, Your Grace. It is the mindset, knowledge, and view of the world that make me say they are young." After coughing twice, seemingly interested in having a conversation with a god at the end of his life, the old man's enthusiasm for the conversation seemed very strong. "You're right." Nodding, Lane felt the old man made sense. Like himself, despite living for tens of thousands of years, he seemed younger than the old man before him. Chapter 273. Because his mindset was such, he harbored a desire to explore all things, had his own goals and yearnings, and would occasionally act on a whim. These qualities far more than the mere length of existence determined whether one was young. "Wait, you wrote that wrong." Lane pointed out a mistake after listening to the old man's rationale. "Wrote it wrong." His right hand paused, and the old man amiably accepted the critique. "Then may I know what the issue is?" It wasn't that the goddess of law approved of Mephisto's speech and then elevated him to a holy spirit. The punishment of humanity by the gods did not begin from there. From the very day Prometheus created humans, their destruction was already destined. Lane explained. The old man's slate seemed to link the collapse of the Temple of Law, Mephisto's ascent in flames, and the subsequent events together. But Lane knew that the connections between these events were not so strong. The bronze humanity was destined for destruction, as it was the will of the Olympian gods. Why? Because it was the forethinker who created man, Lane smiled in response, and not the divine king. In the high tower filled with parchment scrolls and stone carvings, silence ensued for a moment. After a brief pause, the old man considered Lane's words, which had indeed crossed his mind before, as the oracles had suggested. It seemed that the Olympian gods deliberately made humans believe that their calamities were linked to the two deities who created them. Perhaps the younger generation couldn't see it, but he could read the hidden meanings behind it. However, the two godly figures had left too deep an imprint on humanity. Even when faced with divine oracles, people subconsciously blamed Pandora, who played an unknown role. This seeming respect for the Creator instead became their path to doom. It seems that the bronze humanity really has no chance of enduring. Only a new breed of humans, one that does not hold an inherent reverence for the two creators, would survive. The old man sighed, looked at the half-finished slate before him, and then pushed it aside. He had wanted to leave something for posterity, even if that posterity belonged to a new era of humans. He had hoped that, just as the bronze humanity had learned the skills of the golden humanity, future generations would also gain something from the remnants of the Bronze Age. But if these records were flawed, then there was no point in continuing to document them. If that's the case, you are not a deity from Olympus. Finally looking up, the old man turned to his side. Black hair draped over his shoulders, with an exquisite, lush ring on his finger. Dark robes embroidered with dark gold thread that seemed not fixed but constantly shifting, leaping. This deity appeared young, but the elder knew better than to judge a god's age by their appearance. "May I know the purpose of your visit today?" His voice calm, the old man felt some regret but was neither disheartened nor servile. Being spoken to as an equal by a god probably meant that the deity needed something from him. With this in mind, he felt no need to be lesser. As someone who documented this knowledge, he had read the speech of the one consumed by fire as recounted by others. Some points he agreed with, others he thought incorrect, but there was one in particular that the old man deemed quite sensible. If one desires nothing, then there is equality of the spirits. Gods can threaten the living with death, but not someone who is about to die. A command? There is none. Shaking his head and under the old man's somewhat surprised gaze, Lane inquired, "Speaking of which, I still don't know what you're called." "My name is Humor." It's said that during the Golden Age, those tasked with recording history were called Hua, so I gave myself a similar name. Rumor has it that in that age, he did the same, inscribing the past of gods and men on stone tablets. Unfortunately, I never had the chance to witness it. The old man seemed somewhat wistful. "Hua, I remember him." With a look of recognition, Lane recalled the name. Among the golden humanity, he was the outstanding one, perhaps because he spent more time with their king. He could have become an immortal heroic spirit, but later he gave that up voluntarily and asked to enter the well of reincarnation to become a new life. Reincarnation. The old man was not surprised that the deity before him had met the chronicler, for the golden humanity was rumored to be closely connected with the gods. Rather, he was more interested in this unique concept of reincarnation. Yes, the souls of this world return to the spirit realm, and what determines their next life is samsara. Although he was responsible for recording history, He preferred to explore the unknown. I granted his request and gave him an additional reward in return for his diligent work in the starry sky for 1,000 years. I blurred his perception of time, allowing him to stay by the well of reincarnation for a while, waiting for the next human era to arrive, when he would start anew in the form of a human. So, many eons ago, had you foreseen our birth and demise? Unaware that the time of Samsara's birth was actually very short, Humor believed that the others had anticipated the arrival of the next human era even before the birth of bronze humanity. With a self-deprecating smile, the old man suddenly asked, "Forgive my boldness, Your Highness, but if fate truly cannot be changed, does that apply to gods as well? In the past, that was the case. Deities were but puppets to the world itself. Now it's different, but there are still some things unchangeable." Lane smiled. The impact on the destiny of chaos increased by the day, larger and more numerous. Even his understanding of future myths might no longer hold true. For instance, Athena and the fire god, they had yet to come to this world. Enough idle chatter. I promised Prometheus that I'd come here on the day humanity was destroyed, so here I am. Meeting you was just a coincidence. Then follow me, Lane said cheerfully. While I'm still in the mortal realm, you can tell me about your past, your perceptions, and the gods as you see them. In return, I promise to grant you rebirth and keep you safe in this catastrophe. Will humanity then continue? The old man asked. Probably not. Shaking his head slightly, Lane had agreed to help some people survive the calamity, but that was as far as it went. Even if all survived, without women, they would be unable to continue civilization, let alone that Lane didn't think he'd meet many mortals worthy of saving. Then there's no need for that. I don't require a new life. The old man stood up and struggled to lift a stone stele from the side. If you permit, let me record today's events as a historian of bronze humanity. I will inscribe your deeds on a tablet, just as Hua did during the ancient golden age of humanity. This is my gift to you, and I hope it will represent bronze humanity and endure eternally alongside you. Taken aback, Lane seriously regarded the ordinary old man for the first time upon hearing his request. In his eyes, Lane saw no fear of death. If that is what you want, then I permit it. But there's no need to give it to me. Leave it for humans instead. The tide of the ages surged forward. Perhaps those resplendent souls were never limited to just the epic sagas. In past lives, as well as the present, Lane had never been one to throw himself into ideals recklessly, but he had always respected the decisions of these idealists. So he glanced around, and his gaze ultimately pierced through the walls to behold the entirety of Aurora City. The city was thrown into chaos, people venting their fear, with only a few places as exceptions. Like that grand and imposing temple, and the charred figure kneeling on the ground. Divine King's Temple, is that where your former high priest is kneeling? Yes, that is the sanctuary of the Divine King. It used to belong to humans, but now, a miracle has manifested there. The old man seemed to understand something, but he was about to die, and humans were on the brink of extinction. Now, all he wished to do was leave as much of his own mark on the future, as much of the Bronze Age as possible. And Lane's response did not disappoint him. Then let it be placed there, in front of the great temple where bronze humanity worshipped the Divine King. Display the final verses of this age. All began with Prometheus, born from deceit, and thus the end of this era should be buried with them. With a smile, Lane spoke slowly. Let your record accompany that ugly soul. Nobility and baseness complement each other. Chapter 274, The Bet. Everything that happened in the skyscraper was known only to the two people involved. At the end of his life, the old man picked up the stone slab and followed Lane down from the towering building. There was no hurry, and Lane even slowed his pace because of the old man's decaying body. But the passage of time never stopped for this reason. In Aurora City, people who had heard the oracle were running around in panic. Some knelt to pray, some sought what they thought were safe places to hide. The whole city seemed noisy and chaotic. In comparison, on Mount Olympus, the gods looked forward to the scene below with anticipation. Even from a great distance, they could notice the blurring of the edges between sea and land at the eastern edge of the continent. Triton, the son of Poseidon, was about to bring a gift to the gods, which is also one of the acts performed before the real feast began. This banquet held in honor of the goddess of beauty was not just to celebrate her new subgods. It also had a deeper meaning. For after today, the Olympian gods would discuss the affairs of the next human century and divide their interests. Poseidon was the first to suggest this. He no longer wanted to go on as before, and other gods responded in kind. Faced with such a request, Zeus also agreed. Even as the divine king, Zeus was far from doing whatever he wanted. Nowadays, his kingship relied more on his siblings, and the combined strength of 6 powerful deities made his position stable. Therefore, under these circumstances, he must also listen and cater to some of their demands. Of course, these were matters for later. Now, with the divine artifact crafted from godhood as the medium and with the cooperation of the principal god's power, everything around the trident was presented before all the gods. With the lower body of a fish and the upper body of a human, Triton looked vibrant. He pointed into the distance, watching the sea monsters in the waves tear the beasts to shreds. Occasionally, he took action himself, enveloping birds that were too slow to take flight with seawater and watching them suffocate to death. Look, this is the fate of mere mortals, the consequence of deceiving a deity. They act recklessly when they think gods are not watching. But once we discover everything, all they can do is quietly await death. After gulping down a large cup of nectar and watching this scene, Poseidon smiled. He had wanted to act for a long time, but Zeus, concerned about the divine court's reputation and the image of the gods, stopped him. But now it wasn't too late. The noble sea emperor allowed those mortals to live a few more years, only to let his son bring down destruction with the divine artifact today. Mortals should really be grateful for his mercy. Is this amusing to you? On the side, watching the surging sea water engulf the land, beasts struggling in the water, and birds fleeing in panic, Hestia furrowed her brow. Perhaps your son could kill these creatures in a more direct way. She was not a person overflowing with sympathy. Hence, the goddess of Heathfire could understand Zeus's decision. The destruction of humanity was inevitable, but in her view, obliterating humans and enjoying it were two different things. The process is more interesting than the result, my sister. Just like that guy imprisoned in his temple by Zeus, is he not to suffer eternal pain? Poseidon was indifferent to this, and most gods did not care much. If this were done to a god, many among them would feel distressed, which is why Zeus was very cautious about punishing Prometheus. However, if the targets were mere mortals, then there was nothing to say. I'm not interested in this. Since you all want to watch, I'll not dampen your spirits. Standing up, the goddess signaled to the divine king. Very well, my sister. I have always respected your decisions. With a look of regret, Zeus raised his cup. However, about the matters we will discuss later, do you have any thoughts? I don't need anything specific, Zeus. I do not need a particular city, a tribe of humans to worship me as a principal god, forcing them to chant my name daily. As long as every human kindles Heathfire at home, that is already respect for me. Gently shaking her head, the goddess regarded these matters with indifference. She was not like her brothers, always ambitious to go further. In fact, it was still an open question whether faith truly helped a deity reach greatness. Even Zeus was not entirely sure of this. But in his opinion, since faith could break the iron law that divine power is limited by godhood, it might fill the chasm leading to a greater realm. But, if any new humans voluntarily worship me and agree with my path, you all cannot obstruct this. That is the only thing I want to say. While Hestia did not care much about the quantity of faith, she was still very interested in intelligent humans. If someone truly acknowledged her thoughts and voluntarily became her follower, then the goddess would gladly accept them. Of course, my sister, this is your right. In response to Hestia's request, the divine king immediately gave his assent, and the rest of the gods were unlikely to object, so the matter was settled. After Hestia left, The scene quieted down a bit before quickly becoming lively again. Only Aphrodite was a little unhappy. She felt that for the sake of some mortals, Hestia was being disrespectful. Chapter 275. However, she did not show her feelings, only taking note of the matter secretly. As time slowly passed, the scene displayed by the divine artifact and the divine king's power in the center of the great hall kept changing. Although Triton deliberately slowed his pace, he still gradually drew closer to Aurora. Watching this unfold, Poseidon seemed to be unable to restrain himself from saying something. He looked around, then suddenly produced a shining orb from his person. Ladies and gentlemen, merely watching my child perform might be somewhat dull. I have an additional idea that could make this process a bit more interesting. Would any of you care to join in? Oh, how come I wasn't aware that even you could come up with new ideas? Upon hearing this, the heavenly empress casually remarked from the principal seat. Demeter smiled at the comment. Just like Zeus, Poseidon had once shown her attention, but his dullness had failed to spark her interest. Zeus might not be a good husband, but he indeed knew how to sweet-talk. Humph! Nothing but prejudice. With a snort, Poseidon did not take Hera's teasing to heart. He placed the orb on the table and then voiced his idea. The extinction of humans is inevitable, but the process is unknown, so why don't we place a wager on it? Let's bet on how they will react to their demise. Will they beg on their knees, wait for death in despair, attempt to deceive the gods with ridiculous words once more, or attack the gods ignorantly? We'll make random guesses about how many will react in a certain way, and that will be the content of the bet. When his words settled, many deities present showed interest. Compared to a one-sided slaughter, this seemed more exciting and anticipatory. What about the stake? Surely not this worthless thing? A deity pointed at the crystal-clear orb in front of Poseidon. The orb was a concentration of ocean essence, which only a true god with dominion over the seas could extract from seawater. The former scepter of the god of the ocean was forged with this as a material. However, for other gods besides the sea god, it indeed wasn't of much use. Ha ha ha! This is all I have. If you want something different, that would depend on whether my dear brother is willing to part with it. With a laugh, Poseidon looked at Zeus. However, the divine king might already consider humans his possession, so he might not be willing to put them on the table. Am I right, my dear brother? Unmoved in expression, Zeus felt inward anger at Poseidon's mockery, but he knew why he said it. After all, throughout the Bronze Age, he had garnered the most faith from humans in the name of the divine king, while, due to being forbidden from setting foot in the sea, worship of the Sea Emperor by humans was mostly superficial. Thinking this, Zeus couldn't help but find it amusing. It wouldn't take long for his foolish brother to understand that the lack of faith had nothing to do with being the divine king. It was simply because he wasn't up to the task. Therefore, the divine king sketched a map in midair with divine power, which prominently displayed the vast land between Olympus and the East Sea. However, there were very few places suitable for large-scale human settlement in these areas, all due to the aftermath of a divine war a century ago, which still left its scars to this day. Since you're interested, Poseidon, let's all place a bet. The stakes will be the contents of this map, with the winner choosing first. However, whatever choices we make today only signify the beginning, not permanent regulations. The winning deity will have an advantage in the beginning, but what follows will rely on our own capabilities. Looking at Poseidon, Zeus shared the plan he had already formulated. Let the affairs of mortals be resolved by mortals themselves. No deity shall wantonly kill the followers of another deity. Violators will be considered enemies of the divine court. What do you all think? In that moment, as the guardian of oaths, the power inherent in such a role spread out. Although it was far from the assurance of an actual Styx River oath, it still held a certain binding effect on the gods. In Zeus's original plan, he had intended to abandon the current equitable distribution of faith, even though he got the largest share under this equitable scheme. He had discussed this only with Hera and a few subordinates before today. Now that Poseidon had taken the initiative, Zeus was happy to go with the flow. If, in the next human era, the gods were to take arms against mortals en masse, the backlash of such oaths, combined with the tremors of the present law, would together be enough to deal a hefty blow to any deity. The assembly of gods felt the power of this oath, and they were momentarily silent. However, Poseidon didn't concern himself with that. So, you too, my brother? If, in the future, your followers in the mortal realm are killed by mine, or if lands belonging to your followers are occupied by mine, will you keep the oath made today? Of course. A flicker of cold light in his eyes, Zeus nodded in promise. Unless mortals offend me, I shall not act against the followers of other deities. That is my vow. But if it is an oath that even the divine king must obey, then no one shall break it. Good. Then it's settled. Raising his cup, Poseidon drank it all down in one go. He had always felt that he was no worse than Zeus. It was merely because the mother goddess chose to rescue Zeus first, leading to his initial misstep, and thus his subsequent failure. Chapter 276. I bet not a single human dares to draw their sword against the gods, do you? By voicing his opinion first, the Sea Emperor didn't think they would choose to resist with force in the face of the deity's manipulation of natural forces. That way, at least he wouldn't lose. Meanwhile, within Aurora City, the water churned continuously, pouring out inch by inch from the river not far from the city walls. As if the downstream was blocked, the river water spilling out towards both banks without a place to go. At the end of the land, a blue line gradually revealed its traces, followed by a slight, deafening roar of beasts. Your Excellency! Next to the sacred fire, High Priest Mammon had, at some point, taken off his ceremonial robe adorned with lightning patterns. He stood beside a vague and undefined mist, his expression respectful and submissive. As per your prior instructions, everything has been arranged. However, about the previous oracle, don't worry. The fleeting voice came from the mist, and its owner seemed to be in a very good mood. Over these years, I have also mostly figured out the rules of the mortal realm. Since gods fundamentally cannot truly wield their power on the land, then there isn't much to be afraid of them. The sea god might send down a storm or flood, which might be terrifying for a city, but for me it hardly counts for anything. Even you now wouldn't simply die from a flood. With a slight sensing, the patterns spread throughout the human city became clearly visible, and for this Mephisto was very satisfied. To test its effects, the demon had made attempts before. Over the past few months, the souls of the dead had been bound by the abilities affiliated with the patterns, resulting in their delay in returning to their rightful places. However, it was about time. If the gods didn't take action soon, Mephisto would start to become impatient. After all, these lingering souls might at any moment attract the attention of the deities of the spirit realm. Although there were many creatures on the land now, they might not pay attention to such a small amount, but humans were, after all, beings of wisdom. 3 months was almost at the limit. Any longer and there was a risk of exposure. On such a major matter, Mephisto would not trust probability. You did well, Mammon. With offhand praise, although in the devil's perception, the human in front of him did not seem as reverent as he appeared to be, he did not care much about it. After all, saying one thing and doing another was the basic skill once possessed by silver humanity. Once I accept the rewards from the Lord of the Nine Hells, as the first human who sided with me, you will also receive what you desire. As for now, let's enjoy this rare spectacle together. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. The destruction of bronze humanity is indeed a rare sight to behold. Bowing slightly, as if he didn't care that the spectacle to be enjoyed was the death of his kind, Mammon respectfully replied. Contrary to his expectations, the demon negated his assumption. No, that's not what I'm referring to. What I call a rare sight to behold is the death of the sea god's divine child who rides the waves. Speaking leisurely, Mephisto seemed to have chuckled. The death of a divine child is quite interesting, isn't it? Yes. Turning his head towards the direction where the sounds of the waves and beastly roars came from. Although Mammon's gaze could not penetrate the barrier, for some reason, he indeed felt a bit of anticipation at that moment. In his heart, Mammon really wanted to know, when the offspring of deities died, how different were they from mortals? Chapter 277 Miracle. It seems that the bronze humanity hasn't made adequate preparations for the catastrophe. At least that's how it appears on the surface. Walking on the streets, the usually bustling areas seemed somewhat desolate. Even if people occasionally hurried past, they would just glance at the two individuals who seemed out of place and then rush toward what they believed to be a safe location, with no intention of stopping. Clearly, at such a critical time, no one wanted to waste time on two strangers. Cough, cough. Lies told frequently enough can inevitably be accepted as truths. Before, everyone believed that priests could truly communicate with the gods, so naturally, they didn't prepare in advance. With a cough, the old man was not surprised by this. He wasn't a priest, but within humanity, he had some status, which meant that after much contact, those tricks to fool the general populace were useless to him. However, being prepared or not doesn't make much of a difference. If ignorance allows them to spend their last dozen or so years in peace rather than panic, cough, cough, that might not be such a bad thing. Glancing at the symbols full of familiar power hidden beneath the road, Lane didn't respond. Their brief conversation ended, and the two men continued walking along the main road toward the gates of the eastern region, where the sound of water could be faintly heard. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, obscuring all light, a sign of an impending downpour. However, as they walked past the temple, a shout suddenly came from within. "Hey, you two over there. Yes, you. Come over here." A bit surprised, but after hearing the call, Lane hesitated for a moment before leading humor over. In this journey through the mortal realm, he left all choices to the humans. Their fates were completely up to their own decisions. "Hey, are you two also looking for a place to take refuge?" The one who spoke was a young man, accompanied by a few others who didn't seem familiar with each other. They were all standing behind the temple threshold, watching the situation outside. Sort of, "What about it? You want me to take you along?" Lane asked with a smile, looking at the young man who had spoken. "What are you thinking? Isn't this place the safest right now?" Another person, slightly older and wearing a brown robe, loudly stated beside the young man. Nevertheless, Lane could hear the unintentional fear building within, betrayed by the voice. He's right. The sea god has sent divine punishment, and it's ultimately aimed at humans. He wouldn't strike the temple of other deities, would he? The young man also nodded, glancing at the old man beside Lane. Such an aged human was rare in Aurora. "Come inside quickly. If it weren't for the old man you're with, I wouldn't bother with you." Finally understanding the other party's intention, Lane smiled wryly but also felt somewhat touched. Although their idea was wrong, their hearts were in the right place. Facing their gaze, Lane directly countered. "But haven't the gods already abandoned humans? Can a temple not recognized by its god still be considered the domain of that god?" "What nonsense are you talking about?" The few individuals in front of him changed their expressions, clearly upset by Lane's words that pierced their underlying hopes. Obviously, they too knew that today's temples were not the same as before. In the past, the statues in those temples seemed alive, occasionally giving people the feeling of being watched by a formidable presence. But ever since the Creator left, those statues had become dead. Although priests always proclaimed that deities were still watching over them, simply in a more secretive manner, now that divine punishment had come, they had not come up with a solution, undermining their previous claims. Would such temples truly be cared about by other deities? "Staying here probably won't save your life, but I do know that a deity, upon the Creator's request, is willing to provide sanctuary for humans when divine punishment descends." Inside the temple, Lane spoke again, turning to the few now pale-faced listeners. "Really? Isn't the divine king the sovereign over all gods?" Surprised, yet the young man who had first called out still expressed his skepticism. "Of course it's true. You know as well that neither the stars above nor the ground beneath are governed by the divine king. Think again about the Creator's epithet, the forethinker. It's only natural for him to foresee the coming calamity of humans and make preparations, isn't it?" Lane asserted, meeting the young man's gaze. You're right. Well, thank you. The young man was a bit embarrassed, as his tone had been loud earlier, but remembering the imminent disaster, he quickly asked, Could you tell me the name of this deity? As for the name, I haven't heard anyone mention it. Smiling faintly, Lane continued, But I have heard of his deeds. They say that he is deeply connected with humans and that, tens of thousands of years ago, he personally created the golden humanity. Not long ago, the Creator, foreseeing the disaster of humans, sought his aid, and he responded to the expectations of Iapetus' son. As long as people beseech the spirit realm, silently revering his presence when the catastrophe comes, all calamities will be averted, and nothing can harm the bodies of the devout. Chapter 278. That's really wonderful. His face beamed with joy, as the disaster finally seemed to have a chance of passing by. The young man was about to express his gratitude when, in the next moment, he awkwardly raised his head again. He had suddenly remembered that Mount Olympus was to the west of Aurora, the sea to the east, and both the earth and the stars were visibly clear, but he truly did not know where the spirit realm was. The spirit realm, is it the legendary resting place of souls? Where is it? In which direction should I worship this benevolent deity? With a wave of his hand, Lane wasn't surprised by this. In this era, only a few people born with a higher sense of spirituality could accidentally see the surface of the spirit realm, so he explained patiently. Anywhere, in fact, the spirit realm is omnipresent. However, he is the origin of all spirituality in the world. So, as humans, as intelligent life forms, the closest place to the spirit realm is in your heart. Soon after, Lane and the ever-silent Humor declined the retention of the others and turned to leave the temple. He claimed that the reason he was still walking the streets was to share such good news with everyone. As a result, the young man could only say goodbye regretfully to the two men and stated he would also spread the word. After the two had left, several people who were hiding in the temple exchanged glances. They were actually passers-by pulled in by the young man. Now, a middle-aged man, slightly older, looked toward the doorway, where the silhouettes of Lane and his companion were no longer visible. Nuaw, do you really believe what that man just said? HM? What are you talking about? Why wouldn't I believe him? What reason does he have to deceive me? In response to the question, the young man named Nuaw was somewhat puzzled. You are from the second generation of bronze humanity, so you may not recognize. In fact, I've seen that old man before. There was no respect in his voice as the middle-aged man slowly said. He is one of the oldest among the first generation of humans, but he doesn't possess any particularly outstanding talents. The Creator gave us excellent bodies but failed to grant us equally excellent wisdom, which is why he ended up being assigned to guard the archive. It's said that deities record knowledge in books, but we don't have that much knowledge to document yet. That's perfect. The more knowledge he knows, the more it proves that what his companion said is likely true. Nuaw interjected after hearing the middle-aged man's words, still not quite understanding the other's point. What I mean is, if the Creator really did leave something behind before departing, why didn't he entrust it to his most trusted priest, instead of leaving it with an incapable old fellow? And indeed, it might be the one you just spoke with, though there's no difference. They both have little presence in Aurora. I have at least seen Humor, but never that one in black. Maybe not necessarily. Perhaps the Creator realized at the last moment that those he originally trusted weren't trustworthy after all. Somebody interjected upon hearing this. There was some sense in what he said, after all. By this point, even without evidence, bronze humanity had started to harbor some doubts about the priests. Reality wasn't as wonderful as they claimed, so there had to be lies. Perhaps, so you too intend to leave and preach the so-called redemption of the nameless God? Without argument, the middle-aged man simply looked at the one who had spoken, replying indifferently. As expected, the other did not respond. After all, he was still on the fence, not yet prepared to act on this belief. As for what the other person had said, it might be good to believe a little. When disaster struck, if the temple couldn't protect him, Then he would kneel and pray for the protection of that god. After all, it didn't require giving up anything. As for leaving now, that was out of the question. Fine, then you all stay here. I will do as I promised. After looking over the remaining people, Nuwa was disappointed to find that no one wanted to leave with him. Frustrated, but mindful of the urgency, the young man turned and left. Behind him, the others had various expressions, but ultimately, none followed him out of the temple, which had long since lost its divinity. Not far from the temple, the two who had left before him now watched Nuwa's hurrying figure. Cough, cough, I thought you would reveal your true form, tell them of your majesty and sanctity, or expose the real intentions of the rest. Then tell them that because of their skepticism, the grace of the gods would no longer be scattered upon them. Standing behind Lane, the old man spoke slowly. He had seen clearly. Among the few, only the first young man truly believed Lane, and as it turned out, his guess was not wrong. In days past, this might have represented gullibility, but today it could save his life. As for the rest, they clearly wouldn't trust a stranger's words enough to entrust their lives to a god without even a name, so their staying in the temple was no surprise to the elder. Then I must reiterate, Humor. The reason I came here is not to save humanity or to demonstrate my majesty before some mortals. If I wished, I had many opportunities to do so in the past. I came here merely because of a memory from the past, a legend of the sufferer. Of course, there's also a bit of selfishness. Chapter 279. At that, Lane couldn't help but smile a little. By doing so, I can also incidentally give my good child an opportunity to do something he has always wanted to do. Since he so desires to sit in another's place, then let him try. Arbitrary punishment without teaching is considered cruel, and although Lane had a myriad of capricious reasons, he also had one to proceed by the book, because he wanted to. Having said this offhandedly, Lane glanced at the old man. However, it seems you are not as detached as you claim to be. You still want to save more people. As long as I demonstrate my power, no matter what happens to those young individuals, more will invariably believe in my words. I just hope they can have a chance, the old man replied. Shaking his head, the old man surveyed the city he had lived in for a long time. If possible, I still hope as many people as can will learn of your existence, rather than dying in ignorance. They will, but alas, it bears no significance. Watching Nuwa leave in the distance, Lane smiled. I honored Prometheus's request, so everyone will understand, but in the end, I fear not as many will believe as you wish. That's enough. Everyone should pay the price for their choices. In the old man's gaze, Lane moved his fingers slightly, and in a silent moment, time around Nuwa subtly distorted. Therefore, the young man, having just learned of the existence of a mysterious deity, found himself confused amid his bustling. Time today seemed to drag on, as though he had run through many places but not much time had passed. But he didn't think much of it, attributing it to a slow perception of time due to his nerves. After a short rest, he continued to run to notify others. However, if one were to elevate their view, they might be surprised to find that at the same moment, this young man appeared in different parts of the city, spreading the Creator's commands to other deities to different people. Yet sadly, this scene had no audience. Only an old man, not far from death, was drawing the second picture on a slate. In that painting, not in the temple but on a high mountain and its base, it was foretold that even if gods and mortals coexist on earth, they are not equal. At the mountain's peak, in the light, the deity promised mortals, those who worship him sincerely will not be harmed by disaster. Those who sincerely believe in him will find the portal to his kingdom open in their hearts. 6 listeners, unaware of the truth, each showed different attitudes. Some believed and rejoiced, others were skeptical and silent, and still others turned their heads away in contempt. The old man didn't leave comments beside each one. Instead, he simply expressed his thoughts, based on his own experiences. Miracles are rare, so treat every opportunity in life as a miracle. The waves drew ever closer, and at a certain moment, the walls of Aurora came into view at the end of Triton's sight. Walls? They might stop beasts, but they cannot stop me. he said with a confident smile at his trident, knowing that the deities were watching. As a demigod, such opportunities were rare, so he raised the divine artifact and gazed towards the city, striving to align himself with his father god. Mortals, I am the sovereign of the great sea, son of Poseidon, Triton. Today, by the divine decree of my father god, I shall bring you the destined destruction. Fleeing is futile. The will of the gods shall be carried out. The son of the sea god noticed, with his arrival, that on the walls of the city, it seemed like there were some figures watching him. Were they mortals, giving up on hiding and prepared to beg for mercy? Yet regardless of what it was, it could not dampen the excitement in Triton's heart. Kneel and beg for mercy, lowly mortals. It might slightly alleviate the sins of your past. For those who repent, the merciful Triton will be particularly gracious. I allow you to witness the destruction of your kind, and when the final moment comes, greet the unchangeable death. Chapter 280. God's Justice and the Sword. The seawater tumbled over the land, mingling with the rivers. Broken trees, soil, rocks, and the dead bodies of animals floated on the surface, and huge dark shapes lurked below. The heartland of bronze humanity, the Aurora Plains, had turned into a vast ocean, and the sea continued surging violently in all directions. Those humans who fled outside the city, trying to hide in the forests and mountains, did not escape fate. They were either drowned or became food for the giant beasts in the water. Across the entire plain, only its heart, the city of humans, barely survived. But this was not due to luck. Under the control of the divine artifact, the water intentionally bypassed this primitive city. Clearly, as the director behind all this, Triton was well aware that merely drowning the city with a flood was not much of a spectacle, so he slowed down the process and arrived in person before the human city. And just as he had imagined, from afar atop Mount Olympus, Poseidon watched his son's grand pronouncements and could not help but slap the armrest of his chair, laughing heartily with satisfaction. He had long wanted to destroy these ignorant humans. The faith of humans in the sea god was far less than that in other deities, certainly due in part to Zeus's decree that humans should not touch the sea, but this did not stop Poseidon from directing his rage at them. However, at that time, humans were united, so rewards and punishments were usually given by Zeus in consultation with the other deities, in the name of the divine court. No individual deity could act alone. So, even after Prometheus's incident, Poseidon still did nothing. He thought Zeus certainly would not stand idly by the deceit of mankind, yet he waited over a decade without any movement. Until now, when he could finally vent a little. Zeus is still too weak. Our grandfather and father ruled the world with force, but he keeps practicing these crooked ways every day. Muttering to himself in contempt, Poseidon grew increasingly resentful that he had not ascended to the throne of the divine king. However, the scene before him at least lightened his mood, so the sea emperor continued to watch his eldest son's performance. Poseidon was pleased. On the other hand, seated at the highest place, Zeus was also very satisfied. Poseidon's series of actions successfully took the brunt of the other deities' disgruntlement for him, such as his elder sister Hestia. Now, although the goddess had still gone away in a huff, the source of her displeasure was the child and followers of Poseidon. He had achieved his goal and avoided trouble. It couldn't be better. With that thought, Zeus also started to enjoy the beautiful scenery. In fact, deep in his heart, the divine king bore ill will towards bronze humanity, especially that faithless mortal who had pleaded with him for immortality and still disgusted him in retrospect. Using the projection between the divine artifact and its master, Zeus casually cast his gaze towards the human city. What he saw were the panicked crowds, the chaotic order, the approaching downpour, and, Suddenly Zeus sat up straight. He thought he had seen a somewhat familiar figure, which made him pause for a moment. Although he had only met the person once before, that encounter had left a deep impression on the newly crowned king. So Zeus quickly concentrated, trying to find that person again, but was disappointed. The image had flashed by, and by the time the divine king had come to his senses, he was unable to find the figure he had just glimpsed. In this era, most deities could not see through the earth on their own. The reason the gods were able to enjoy this grand play from Mount Olympus was because the trident of the Sea Emperor was a divine artifact naturally bestowed with Poseidon's godhood, and it was in the hands of his child. But for this same reason, the view of the deities was tied to the movement of the divine artifact. They could not control it themselves. Poseidon, do you have a way to control your divine artifact? With his right hand subconsciously gripping the armrest, Zeus casually asked. Of course I can, if it weren't for these damned laws. After taking a sip of nectar, Poseidon sarcastically replied. But unfortunately, under the suppression of the present world, if I use my divine power to communicate with my divine artifact far above the earth, you all know what would happen. Why? What a ludicrous question are you asking? Surprised by Zeus's question, Poseidon wondered what the latter was up to. Whether or not he could do it, others may not know, but would he not himself know? His thunderbolt arrow and the trident of the Sea Emperor were similar products. In this respect, there should be no difference between them. Not just Poseidon. Upon hearing this, other deities also looked at Zeus, pondering what the divine king was planning. Faced with their gaze, Zeus had no choice but to wave his hand, indicating that it was nothing of concern. It's nothing. I just thought this angle wasn't very good. His Majesty the Divine King is really growing in majesty day by day. Even such trivial matters must be mentioned. Snorting coldly, Poseidon paid no further attention. Maybe it's just nerves, or perhaps it's the influence of my unborn daughter affecting my judgment. Seeing the casual response, Zeus reassured himself a bit. He steadied his spirit and then continued to watch the images before him. But before long, a voice of surprise came from his side. What happened? Turning his head, Zeus looked towards the goddess clad in a green gown, whose figure was both voluptuous and elegant. Chapter 281. That was Eurynomé, as one of the original protagonists of today's banquet, the mother goddess of the Graces. Zeus had granted her the honor to sit in the seat second only to Hera. However, at the moment, this Oceanid was looking at the water screen with an astonished expression.
Sorry, I'm truly surprised.
I never expected to see a person from the Golden Age on the walls of Bronze Humanity's city. Then again, it might just be a similarity in appearance. Her complexion was one of disbelief, but Eurynomé soon found an explanation. As Métis's sister, Eurynomé had witnessed the birth of the first generation of humans at Delphi alongside her. She might not remember others, but the very first human was an exception. I must be mistaken, perhaps Prometheus intentionally made them resemble that way. I remember their family was quite close to Golden Humanity back in the day. That person looks a bit like the first golden human created by the gods, though he should be dead by now. Golden human, ity? Murmuring the name, Zeus felt something was amiss but couldn't figure out what exactly. He was about to remind Poseidon to tell his son not to cause too much trouble, to just flood the mortal realm with a deluge and avoid the special human. But in the end, Zeus held back his words. After all, as Poseidon had just mentioned, such an act would come at a great cost, and all this couldn't be justified only because the divine king felt uneasy. Fortunately, it was his son, not himself, who was responsible for the deed. Thus, Zeus relaxed and continued to watch the images before him. Outside Aurora City, everything continued. I permit you to witness the destruction of your kind, and when the final moment comes, embrace the inevitable death. Raising the divine artifact, Triton made a judgment like the principal gods and did not forget to add a special effect for himself. Under the command of the trident, water was levitated and formed a massive human image behind him. From a distance, it seemed as if the deity of the Sea Titans had revealed his true form in the mortal realm, ominously overlooking the city on the plain. Triton was quite pleased with this. The sight was indeed imposing. However, as the seconds and minutes passed, he did not see the humans on the distant walls kneeling to beg for mercy. Were they petrified with terror? Frowning, Triton stamped his foot, and was swiftly carried toward Aurora City on the backs of 8 sea serpents. As he drew nearer, the giant formed of sea water followed, and soon, Triton's gaze was no longer obstructed by the city walls, and he could see the scene within the city. It was much more normal this time. He saw some people running around in confusion, others kneeling to beg, and still others hiding in some temples. But Triton didn't sense any divine power within those temples, so he didn't spare them a second glance. However, compared to the rest, the mortals still on the city walls remained conspicuously unchanged. Narrowing his eyes, Triton observed more carefully to prevent any unexpected occurrences. Indeed, they were a group of mortals, seemingly stronger than the others but only by so much. As for the leader of the group, he appeared to be infused with a familiar divine aura of the sun. But that proved nothing. Life tainted by such power was common on the earth. It seemed to be a cursed power. Poseidon once mentioned in his leisure that even the divine king had a few such extremely powerful materials at hand, yet no one could use them. There had been a deity who tried to forcefully harness it, but the attempt led to quite the farce in the divine court. Only because that individual was a deity did he manage to hastily abort this amalgamation. If it had been a mortal or even a demigod, Poseidon believed he would have gone mad by now. Who are you people? And why do you not kneel before a god? As thoughts flashed by, Triton, sitting on a throne formed from seawater, leaned forward slightly. Behind him, the giant also bent its form, and for a moment, it was as if the sky itself was bearing down, an intangible pressure advancing forward. Some on the city walls finally seemed to feel fear, retreating a few steps and bowing their heads, as if they dared not meet the gaze of a god any longer. Triton was pleased with this reaction, but soon his attention returned to the leader of the humans. He seemed to be completely unaffected. Their eyes met briefly, but facing that sharp gaze, Triton instinctively avoided it, but then he glared back angrily. Now, he was a god. How could he be intimidated by a mortal? Are you here to destroy mankind? Before he could speak, across a great distance, Triton heard the human ask. Of course, wasn't I clear enough? The ruler of the sea shall bring about the destruction of humanity. This is the end you deserve. Without hesitation, Triton thought this human must have been influenced by that substance, causing him to lose his sense of fear. But immediately after, he heard what the human said. Humans may have deceived the gods, and it is only right that you dispense punishment. But just because of a god of hindsight and his wife, whom humans have never cared about since their creation, Hades brings disaster, and the god of the ocean brings floods. Is this what you call divine justice? Ha! Yes, this is divine justice. Initially taken aback, Triton hadn't expected this human to discuss justice with him. Is this a matter that should concern both gods and the mortal realm? With a cold laugh, Triton was becoming impatient. He suddenly realized that under the watch of the other gods, there was no need for him to talk at length with a mortal. So he communicated with the divine artifact, and 10 million tons of seawater surged in response. Divine justice means that when we bid you pray, you ought to pray. When we bid you kneel, you ought to kneel. We gods created you, so you should obey our words. And certainly, we can destroy you, and we need no reason. Just like now. With a downward sweep of his hand, the sea giant forming behind Triton pressed down as well. This wasn't any powerful creation, just a simple flow of water. But what might be an overblown joke to deities was an unbearable burden for the walls of mortals. Triton was curious whether, once the walls upon which this mortal stood collapsed and he struggled for survival in the sea, he would still be able to question him so calmly. Just like now, mortals, you are but ants. Your destruction, what is it to you? As he spoke the last phrase, Triton couldn't help but feel surprised by the sudden burst of eloquence. If not for faith, mortals really were being so inconsequential that gods would not bother to glance at them as they were crushed. He felt his summary was spot on. Then the next moment, with a loud bang, the giant of sea water exploded. A bronze spear wrapped in golden light flashed by, and Triton dodged instinctively, but he still couldn't avoid it. Ah! First startled, then came the intense pain in his shoulder. Amidst his cry of pain, almost as an instinctual reaction, Triton held his trident in front of him. Clang! Crack! The sound of metal colliding and breaking rang out as Triton, clutching his shoulder, watched in horror as a bronze sword broke in two and fell. When a mortal object collided with a divine artifact, it naturally broke into two pieces. But the numbness in Triton's right hand told him that had he not been vigilant, that sword may well have pierced his chest. In that moment, as fear of a narrow escape from death welled up within him, he gripped his trident as though it were the assurance of his life. The divine artifact seemed to sense the danger its master faced and enveloped him in a blue halo. Through the halo, Triton realized what had just happened. The spear and short sword previously in the human's hands were now gone, and currently, he was taking another sword from someone beside him. Who are you? Which deity's descendant are you? Do you realize what you're doing? Speaking deliberately, Triton thought he was being very restrained, but the response that followed finally made him lose his reason. Because the human simply raised his sword, with a fierce golden flame surging around him. Son of the Sea Emperor, Triton, who had been so proud before, was now engaging in conversation after feeling pain. Why? Golden humanity never fears death. Let's see if gods fear death. Thus, in the next moment, under the incredulous gaze of the humans in the city, and in the presence of sky, earth, sea, and not just one interested deity, Cohen swung his sword again. The swordplay was unremarkable, but the essence contained within shone even brighter than before. Chapter 282. The Road and RA Sighting. There were no complex variations, no dazzling light and shadow, just a very straightforward sword thrust. Yet everyone who saw it could feel that something about its wielder seemed to have changed from before. The transformation was not drastic, more like a beginning, but oftentimes the difference between having and not having was like night and day. Swoosh! A huge crater was stamped into the city wall as Cohen leaped up, aided by solar force. At this moment, he felt his spirit and will more unified than ever before. Even the incessant mental disturbances from the divine fragment seemed like a gentle breeze on his face. Scenes beneath the collapsing mount of the gods flickered in his heart. Now, Cohen had only one thought in his mind. To defeat this sea god was also to shatter his own past mistakes. Rip! In nearly an instant, Cohen's figure crossed 1,000 meters to face Triton. With a sound like ripping silk, the blue light shield was split in two, only slightly slowing down the human king's advance. If this were out at sea, where the law's suppression wasn't as strong, Cohen would never be able to cut through a barrier infused with divine power with a common bronze sword, but reality offered no hypotheticals. At this moment, it was merely a shield of water, bolstered by authority and saturated with elemental power. With that strike, there was no longer any obstacle between Triton and Cohen. The enemy was right before his eyes, and the human king's spirit tensed even more. He had realized that the so-called son of the Sea Emperor did not seem particularly powerful himself, but the beautifully crafted trident in his hands was by no means ordinary. Holding his breath and focusing, he lightly stepped on the turbulent sea water and Cohen's initially slowing speed surged once more. He raised his bronze sword, ready to bang, splash. A sudden explosion of water rang out just in front of Cohen as Triton burst apart into a cloud of water. After a moment of stunned silence, Cohen quickly realized that the previously haughty son of the Sea Emperor had actually run away. Huff, damned human! Did you really think the noble son of the Sea Emperor would engage in melee combat with you? That is something only the lowly would do. Go, kill him for me. Behind the vast ocean, the water converged once again into Triton's figure. Now, however, the son of the Sea Emperor clearly seemed somewhat rattled. Just as the wind gods could become wind, Triton, with the torso of a man and the tail of a fish, could also transform into fish or water. Most importantly, this instinctual transformation was extremely natural, almost imperceptible to other beings, and required no time to prepare. This was the key to his successful evasion of Cohen's attack. Having never been in combat before, the recently kindled rage in Triton's heart was instantly extinguished. Having narrowly escaped fatal blows from Cohen twice in a row, he completely abandoned the notion of engaging directly. Fortunately for him, he wasn't alone. Monsters once bathed in divine blood. It is time to serve the Sea Emperor. Go, kill him for me. With the divine artifact raised high and his command issued, the sea beasts within the waves obeyed. Unlike deities, the power of these sea beasts, which possessed divine blood, came from their bodies or other forces, making them equally formidable in any environment. Roar! Hiss! Neighing and bellowing rose and fell in succession as the sea beasts frantically charged toward the insignificant human. It wasn't just the summon of the divine artifact that motivated them, but their instincts, telling them they could reap extraordinary benefits by consuming that human. However, faced with all this, Cohen remained undaunted. This feeling, grasping the hilt of his sword tightly, with the blood flowing through his veins covering the blade, he felt in better shape than ever before. Something was accumulating, as if being refined from deep within his spirit and body, and even the world around him became more vivid. Yet Cohen felt as if something was missing, preventing them from fully coming to life. But whether the change was complete or not, in such a state he felt fearless. Clang! The sword edge cut through the air. The tiny human against the 100-meter-tall sea beasts was like an ant. Yet as the sword pierced the body of the sea beast, it was followed by a thunderous roar. The sword did almost no physical damage to the sea beast's body, but for some reason, its strong presence instantly weakened. HMPF, send more, said Triton dismissively from the back, having witnessed the scene, then waved his hand. Sea beasts, he had as many as he wanted. Even the bodies of true gods could feel exhaustion without divine power and authority. Even if they could not be vanquished, they could be worn out to death. In the city, the deserted streets, rain poured down like a torrent, pattering against the road with a crisp sound. The skirmish in the sky outside the city became more intense. One after another, sea beasts charged at Cohen, only to be either grievously wounded or killed, their blood dyeing the nearby waters red. Of course, this was in part because the sea beasts were not particularly strong themselves. The primeval offsprings of the original sea god and father of monsters, for example, were not amongst them. Those truly powerful sea beasts, whose names have been passed down through generations, often possess independent thought and are not so easily summoned or dismissed by a divine artifact. Like the Gorgon sisters with their potent petrifying powers, they, similar to the Cyclops, may not be deities but possessed innate divine forces that even gods could not ignore. Chapter 283. Because of this power, or perhaps the allure of beauty, Medusa, the youngest of the three sisters, was even summoned to the court by the Sea Emperor and naturally would not be commanded by the children of Poseidon. Do you wish to ask something? The rain was pouring down, yet not a drop penetrated the area around the two of them. Watching the clash outside the city, Lane also noticed humor behind him, hesitating to speak. Yes, Your Excellency, I wish to know, is he a human? Humor looked up, gazing at the figure enshrouded in a golden blaze across the sky. In the impending doom of the bronze humanity, someone took up a sword against a deity, another event worthy of being recorded. However, whether the individual in question was human or a demigod was undoubtedly crucial for the content he was about to record. Yes, he is, but not of the bronze humanity. He is of the golden humanity, the very first human I created. As the king during the Golden Age, just as your records say, he once held devout faith in the deities, and as for now, you have seen it for yourself. With a hint of emotion, had not Lane sensed that pure, powerful power of faith 100 years ago, he probably wouldn't remember Cohen now, as he had never exhibited anything notably special. Although Lane had made him king of the humans and had given him the opportunity to dream, at that time, Cohen's identity was merely that of golden humanity. He was the first of the golden humanity, so Lane had named him king. He was the leader of the golden humanity, so Lane had allowed him to witness the civilization slate. But now, as Lane's attention returned to him, he had to admit that Cohen, in some respects, had vastly exceeded his expectations. 10,000 years ago, Lane personally created the initial meditation method in accordance with the authority of spirituality, and he distinguished 7 levels for non-deity beings, corresponding to the 7 realms of meditation. However, the reality was that the 7th layer of the meditation method, the realm of intrinsic divinity, within the spiritual domain, was speculative. Whether it could be successfully attained was completely unknown. After all, until now, not even a single common being had managed to achieve this on their own. Not even Hecate, who had fully mastered the 7 phases meditation method, as she was a naturally born deity who did not need to confront that threshold. Therefore, Lane was not quite sure whether the path to divinity through recognizing the world, discerning its rules, summarizing one's own order of all things, and the gradual sublimation of spirit until the birth of divinity could actually succeed. Yet now, the Golden Human King seemed to not be following this path. He was using his actions, his superficial understanding of the essence of power, to demonstrate to Lane a completely different method right before his eyes. The Oracle Stone Tablet of Delphi, a manifestation of the primal order, capable of even glimpsing one's destined path of life. The first of these tablets was inscribed with the axiom, "Know thyself." After being transformed by the spirit realm, Lane had added a phrase, "Know the world, and then know thyself." The meditation method he created was about understanding the world, while Cohen's current state was about having comprehended himself. The fact proved that, while one might be harder than the other, neither was superior or inferior. So he is the king of the golden humanity? At his side, Humor did not think so much. Having received an answer, he merely sighed and then bowed his head slightly, starting to etch onto the slate. This was the third picture he carved, once again divided into 3 parts. In the first section, a pair of large hands shaped the first humans. It was the scene of deities creating humanity. In the second section, humans are bowing in worship to the deities, while in the third section, someone draws a sword towards the sky, pointing directly at the sea god wielding a trident. The expressions of the characters were the core of this part of the stone carving. The cluelessness of birth, the devoutness while worshipping, and the resolve coupled with subtle perplexity when drawing the sword made the characters seem alive. Interestingly, the sea god's likeness was not Triton but resembled the statue of Poseidon in the temple. Perplexity, was it that apparent? Coming back to his senses, Lane, looking at the stone carvings emerging from the old man's hands, unexpectedly asked. Such a capable individual, yet he remained quiet and peaceful in Aurora for so long, only to act today. I can feel his conflicting emotions. I hope he finds the answer he seeks. That's all I can do for him now. Nodding his head, Lane expressed his agreement. From another perspective, he could see that it was precisely this point that had kept Cohen from truly taking this historic step. Unlike Lane's outer to inner conception for the spiritual domain, the Golden Human King had unconsciously followed another path, inner to outer. With his resplendent will at the core, steadfast on his path, he achieved an integration and sublimation of spirit and flesh, ultimately taking a leap forward into divinity. This was the state Cohen was in now. This was undoubtedly viable. If these conditions could truly be fulfilled, perhaps Cohen could become the first person to achieve demigod status through his own efforts today. It's worth noting that a demigod is similar to a territorial god, a broad concept with wildly varying limits. The extent of power of such self-promoted entities was not something Lane was entirely certain of. However, in reality, Cohen had still not found his own path. Now, with resentment towards the deity's indifference, his will was indeed brilliantly luminous, but he did not know what to do after vanquishing the deity before him. There was a beginning, but no continuation. Thus, Cohen's divinity remained embryonic, seemingly within reach yet elusive. Chapter 284. It's difficult and very personal. Not at all like the structured meditation I had envisioned. After all, people's natural wills differ. But this is actually just right. Divinity, perhaps, should be so unique. Now, everything was ultimately preparation for what Lane would do in the future, so he silently committed to memory the entire process of Cohen's transformation. Success or failure, it would all be a valuable lesson. As time passed, Cohen's condition eventually plateaued after reaching a certain limit. However, the battle did not pause for even a moment. He seemed to be fighting sea beasts, but in reality he was getting closer and closer to Triton. Clearly, Cohen was well aware of who was the source of all this. If he could deal with this sea god, the abnormal floods would recede, the sea beasts would no longer linger on land, and everything would come to an end. As for what to do afterward, that would be a matter for later. Will he succeed?
No.
Shaking his head, Lane knew that Cohen wouldn't be able to kill Triton, not because of lack of strength, but because someone would surely interfere. Regardless, Poseidon, if only for the sake of his own honor, would never allow Triton to be killed by a mortal in plain sight. Just wait and see. Whether he succeeds or not, he will still make it through today safely. In terms of rationale, the king of men who once harbored strong faith in him perfectly fit the target Lane wished to save today. After all, to the master of spirituality, worship in the heart unquestionably met the standard more than bodily worship did. So Cohen was sure not to die today. And in terms of value, that went without saying. Before he fully embarked on the path of his own divinity, Lane would not allow anyone to kill him. Snap! The wineglass was crushed, and the relaxed atmosphere of Olympus had turned so quiet you could hear a pin drop, making the sound of the shattering glass all the clearer. With a face ashen, Poseidon watched the scene unfolding before him, where some unknown fellow had taken Triton's place and become the main character of the drama. With each sea beast that was slain, Poseidon felt as if the blade was slapping his own face. Who is he? Has any of you left offspring in the mortal realm? Grinding his teeth, it seemed like Poseidon was looking for a scapegoat. But as his gaze swept around, not a single one rose to answer. The expressions of the gods varied. Some avoided his gaze, not daring to meet the Sea Emperor's wrathful eyes. Others smirked, seemingly mocking that his son couldn't even handle a mortal city, and some watched the spectacle on the screen, engrossed in this rare drama. What, nobody dares to own up? We're the only ones privy to human affairs. Whoever did this, confess now while you still can. Ahem, Poseidon, calm yourself. Zeus interjected, pacifying Poseidon's increasingly irate questioning, and turned his attention to Eurynomy. At this moment, the deity of the grassy water pastures was stunned. The scene on the screen was utterly incomprehensible to her. Although she was a true god, in terms of her godhood, she probably didn't possess the combat strength found in Triton's divine artifact. A human leader, who once built temples for the gods at the foot of Mount Othrys, suddenly possessing such power, was an immense shock to the goddess. Eurynomy, I recall you told me this human resembles a golden humanity member? Yes, but as far as I remember, that golden humanity member also did not possess such power, Eurynomy replied, tearing her gaze away from the screen with difficulty, confirming what she recalled. Although she had seen him only a few times, the golden humanoid still fit her preconceived notions of mortals. If that's the case, then the situation is clear. With a glint in his eye, Zeus turned to Poseidon with a smile. This is not a demigod, at least not one from any of us present. Whatever way he has managed to survive till now, however he obtained this power, I believe the son of the Sea Emperor shall not be thwarted by him, correct? Humph, Zeus, you've always been in charge of the affairs of humans, resulting not only in the matter with Prometheus, but now even... His face twitching, Poseidon was about to lash out a few more pointed words at Zeus, but he halted mid-sentence when the corner of his eye caught something on the screen, and the Sea Emperor's face abruptly changed. You dare! No longer caring about the backlash of the law, Poseidon channeled the power of a true deity through the connection with the divine artifact, across the void. However, he still had some sanity left to not unleash his full divine power, invoking only a fraction of it instead. In the next instant, the feedback from the law arrived. Almost visibly, Poseidon's divine power level took a nosedive, barely maintaining the threshold of significant divine power. This was not a permanent injury, but it would likely take 100 years or two to recover. Disregarding the loss of divine power, having paid the price, Poseidon knew he could only act once. So along with the power that was expedited, he also sent his furious rebuke. Triton, your mission is to destroy the humans, not waste time with this relic from an old era. Now, flood the city, and leave the other obstacles for later. Chapter 285, The Weapon Thrown at the Gods. Dozens of breaths ago, outside the city of Aurora, the battle raged on in the sky. Standing at a distance from Cohen, Triton had been tense for a while but finally relaxed. From the looks of the far-off scene, this special human had indeed been entangled. Prometheus, it must be him. This old fool probably knew without his protection, the fate of humans wouldn't be good, so he deliberately left such a contingency plan. Feeling inwardly irritated, Triton locked onto the forethinker god being punished in the depths of the East Sea. As for the human wielding this power, how could that be possible? As the noble son of the sea god, if he couldn't do it, how could a mortal possibly manage? Just you wait, you old relic of bygone ages, you unrestrained member of the Titan deity clan. Once I have dealt with your creation, I'll have a good talk with you. With a malicious grin, Triton decided that after today's events, he would definitely have a good talk with Prometheus, who was bound at the bottom of the sea, to tell him how he had destroyed the humans, how they had begged him for mercy, and then how he had mercilessly refused them. He imagined that the forethinker god would be delighted to hear the news of his creation's fate and to share the joy Triton felt at their killing. His mouth curled into a sneer, yet in the next moment, the trident in Triton's hand suddenly trembled. Alerted by the instinct of the divine artifact, he saw for the third time that rapidly approaching figure, now almost upon him. The first time was upon first sight, the second was mistaking him for a demigod. But the third, Triton simply could not have imagined that, in just a matter of minutes, Cohen had taken another half a step beyond his original limit. But this time, he finally reacted. Facing the golden light, Triton sneered coldly and once again placed the trident in front of him, with his body starting to transform into a stream of water. As long as I run fast enough, what can you do to me? Clang! Metal struck metal, and the second bronze sword, like its predecessor, met its end. The tremendous force sent a numbness through Triton's palms, but his innate talent was even quicker. Transforming into water, Triton was about to repeat his trick, but just as he was about to flee, he suddenly felt tugged back. He could leave, but the divine artifact he held in his hand had been grasped by another hand. The other's purpose was not him. Without an overwhelmingly superior force, it was difficult for anyone to kill a son of the sea god in the ocean, yet he was not without vulnerabilities. The divine artifact was one of them. As I thought, you didn't rely on your own strength to stir up the deluge. It all comes from this trident. Grasping the tip of the divine artifact, streaks of blood trickled from Cohen's fingertips. Holding a divine artifact not one's own was no simple matter, but he seemed to be oblivious to this fact. Now, terminate this disaster. With a fierce tug, the trident of the Sea Emperor was pulled from the swirl of water. In that moment, Cohen felt as though he perceived an immense body of water beyond his understanding. Before, he had never seen the sea, but now he knew it. This was the so-called authority of a god. Wait, do you understand what you're doing? A look of panic crossed his face. Triton had not expected Cohen's target to be not him. Indeed, this divine artifact was not his, and although the trident could merge with the sea and freely escape in its surroundings, it was ultimately a beat too slow. And it was this slight delay that became Triton's vulnerability. Stop! Ignoring Triton's shout, Cohen spoke firmly. Following the sensation of near omnipotence in the sea, he issued his first command to the surging seawater on land, and it indeed responded to the will of the King of Men. The seawater stopped flowing, and the waves ceased their movement. Holding up the divine artifact, Cohen, under Triton's horrified gaze, prepared to send the waters back to where they belonged. However, this action finally provoked Poseidon, who was already in a state of fury, to take action. If he allowed a human to reseed the flood again, even if he later personally destroyed the humans, Poseidon's name would become a joke among gods and men. From then on, when speaking of the sea god, people would likely remember the Sea Emperor who had been deprived of his divine artifact by humans. In the next moment, following an inexplicable connection, the trident that had just been in Cohen's hand trembled fiercely and then glowed divinely. A powerful force instantly shook Cohen's hand off it, and the trident hovered in the air. Cohen's expression changed, and he stepped forward to grasp the divine artifact again. But sensing the actions of this audacious usurper, a vague silhouette instantly appeared beside the trident. That's enough, golden humanity. Roll back to where you came from, just like the rest of your kind. You are not worthy to utter my name, mortal. Leave the living to their world and stay out of it. Old dead of a past age. The trident was raised and then brutally swiped across. Wielding completely different might in the hands of divine power, the divine artifact finally revealed its true power. Boom! With a muffled sound, the trident struck Cohen squarely in the chest. Cohen, who had been slaying left and right, spat out a mouthful of blood under the impact, his body streaking across the sky and crashing straight into the city wall, and the Sea Emperor's voice echoed throughout the land at the same moment. Triton, your task is to destroy the humans, not waste time with this relic of a bygone era. Chapter 286. Father. Now drown this city, and as for other obstacles, we can talk about them later. Upon hearing Poseidon's stern voice, Triton first panicked, but then laughed. What good does it do for you to be strong? Your backer has been locked in the depths of the sea, while mine still watches over the mortal realm from Mount Olympus. As you command, Father God. Grasping the trident of the Sea Emperor, which he had regained, Triton did not look back at the wall that Cohen had knocked a hole through. As a powerful principal god who did not care about the laws of this world and took action personally, it would be almost impossible for him to escape unscathed, even if the god did not use full strength. Looks like your leader is no good, mortals. The game's over. Now, it's my turn. With a swing of the divine artifact, the long-awaited waters finally surged forth, and even beyond the plains where humans dwelled, many other areas were inundated. Overflowing the plains, filling the valleys, climbing the mountains, sea beasts and the original creatures of the land fought everywhere. It was not until this moment that the Great Flood may have truly begun. Why are there two more? Did Prometheus leave behind more than one contingency plan? When the flood broke through the city walls and the water level kept rising, Triton, putting aside trivial matters, easily achieved this feat, which was not difficult for him. But within Aurora City, Triton suddenly discovered that just like the off-Cohen before, there were two strange humans standing on the water surface, utterly different from their wailing kindred. Ha! Whether they are or not, it doesn't matter. With a disdainful smile, feeling the remaining divine power in the artifact in his hand, Triton mimed a throw. It was enough power for one more blow, enough to deal with them. And to prevent any accidents, this time he wouldn't even come close. The flood poured out, silencing all spirits. The waves that blotted out the sky rose and then crashed down in a thunderous fall, swallowing the entire Aurora City. In an instant, countless low wooden homes and numerous bronze humanity seeking refuge were swept into the endless vortex of the sea, their screams and cries of fear swirling and extinguishing before vanishing amid the roaring billion tons of seawater. Compared to nature, mortals are still too weak. Broken, floating timber, woven hemp and straw frames, along with some who, by chance, had not died in the water, struggled desperately in the furious turbulent tides, but were quickly dragged down by the underwater currents, never to breathe again. Everywhere the flood passed, everything was destroyed like dry twigs in a gale. But not everything was without exception. Mortal objects had no power to resist in front of the waters and were destroyed in an instant, yet some special buildings remained intact, stubbornly standing amid the violent waters. These were the various temples within Aurora City. The tempestuous flood arrived, but the main structures of the temples remained intact, not because some power protected them, but because of their very nature. Decades of continuous sanctification were not without effect. Even though the divinity within the statues had been extracted, the contaminated materials had long become extraordinary. While they were not impervious to water and fire, they were enough to withstand the flood for some time. However, just because the temples were unharmed didn't mean the people inside were safe. In a temple dedicated to Hestia, water kept seeping in through the gaps, and Kavai, drenched through and through, trembled as he clung to a thick column. The water level was rising, with him half submerged, the originally high ceiling of the temple not far above him, and moreover, the water was rising rapidly. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before he would be entombed here. Fake. It's all fake. Staying in the temple is useless, and that absurd guy's method didn't work either. I clearly prayed to the spirit realm. So why is the water still coming in? They are all liars, all the gods. They should all die. Kavai heard the angry and fearful voices of his companions in his ears. Faced with death, it seemed the reverence for the deities had disappeared. He didn't need to turn his head to guess that his companions' faces must be ferocious and horrible. But he couldn't care about his companions now, as he could hardly protect himself. Save me. Just then, a somewhat familiar voice rang out in his ears, and Kavai looked in its direction. Through the skylight, originally placed high in the temple but now close by, he could see a familiar hand reaching out in the water not far from the temple, seemingly trying to grasp something, and then it was submerged and fell silent. The water was too fast, so that the person barely cried for help before sinking below the surface. Yet, even with the swift waters, Kavai still recognized the owner of those hands. Kar-2. Stunned for a moment, he reached out his hand as though trying to grasp something, then let it fall powerless. He thought he would feel sad, cry, but in reality he couldn't cry, nor did he feel any similar emotions. Because Kavai knew that his friend had merely gone ahead of him, and soon it would be his turn. Is this punishment? Yes, Creator, Goddess, I have sinned. In the last moments of life, while his companions cursed around him, Kavai was not hysterical, nor did he collapse in despair. He quickly reflected on his life over decades and then suddenly felt that today's events seemed to have been foreshadowed. Unlike the other priests, as a priest of the goddess of Huthfire, Kavai really was among the few humans who knew they were deceiving the gods, yet still maintained faith in them. Whenever he felt the gaze from the divine statue during rites, he always experienced a profound peace from within. If it had been up to him, he would not have wished to deceive the goddess for the sake of sacrifice, but this was the choice of humanity, and he had no choice but to accept it. Chapter 287. Since the gods had abandoned humanity, he had not felt that familiar gaze in a very long time, nor had he been at peace. This is the punishment I deserve. At least it is mine. Releasing his grip, Kavai let the current carry him away under the incomprehensible stares of the people around him. As the torrent pulled him under the water, he closed his eyes silently and prayed in his heart. May the gods forgive me. Kavai sank into the water, and gradually he lost consciousness. However, at that moment his state seemed forever fixed. Death was erased from him, and life could no longer pass away. Maintaining this state of neither life nor death, he sank to the bottom, arriving directly at the center of the temple. There, it was where he had worshipped the gods countless times. Finally, I have visited every place. Wiping the sweat from his brow, Nuwa felt that time had passed a bit slowly today, but now he had let go of these doubts. Along the way, he had met person after person, a few of whom believed in him, but many more did not, and he took every question they had to heart. He had also wavered, for deceit was not absent among bronze humanity, but even if there was only a sliver of hope, if it could allow more people to survive, he was still willing to try. Now, the task he had set out to do was finished, and in the sky above, a giant wave hundreds of meters high was crashing towards this place. Now, it was time to use his own life to test whether everything he had done had any meaning. Born because of the gods, dying because of the gods, I truly hope that future humanity does not come from the hands of the gods. Perhaps it's quite good for humans to live their own lives? With a bitter smile, standing on the empty street, facing the direction of the flood, with no place to hide and no intention to run, Nuwa knelt on the ground and murmured softly, "O gods, if you truly exist, please listen to me. I pray to you devoutly. I devoutly praise your holy deeds. If every human who prays to you could survive this day, I am willing to spend the rest of my life spreading your revered name in the mortal realm. May your will be done on earth, just as it is done in your kingdom." The prayer rang out in the deserted streets, yet the waves did not stop for it. The mortal's frame was negligible before it, and when the giant wave struck, all traces vanished, leaving only the rubble of broken buildings floating on the surface to prove that anything had ever existed here. This was already the central area of Aurora, and when it too was swallowed by the flood, not an inch of land could be seen in the Great Plain. There was no land, only the waves and rapids, and before one's eyes lay only a world of ocean amidst the flashing of lightning, the rolling of thunder, and the pouring rain, with nothing else in sight. Only at the edge of one's vision, there were still a few elevations. Those were mountain tops, but predictably, as the sea level continued to rise, they too would not escape. It seems my mission is over. Standing beside Lane, looking upon this vast world of water, Humor set down his chisel. In front of him, the fourth painting was complete, depicting the apocalyptic scene of a world submerged by water. However, amidst the flood, there were specks of light, standing out significantly against the peril of the apocalypse. Not yet. Lane shook his head faintly, as if he were walking on the waves as easily as on flat ground, his expression as calm as ever. Below the sea, a ritual track that had been etched long ago now began to glow, slowly starting to revolve. In theory, such a large and intricate ritual could easily be disrupted, but shielded by the endless waters, everything went unnoticed. Of course, nothing could escape Lane's sight. If the destruction of bronze humanity has indeed ended, compared to what's left to do today, everything has only just begun. Use your stone carvings to record them. That is my promise to you. Crack. A clap of thunder resounded, and a lightning bolt illuminated the dim world. The elder noticed, on the distant sea, the sea god's son who seemed to control everything was watching them. He stepped forward half a step and then stepped back, subsequently raising his steel trident. Your Excellency. Lane raised his hand slightly, stopping the elder mid-sentence. He knew what he wanted to say, but he just glanced over and advised in a faint voice. You have completed your task, Triton, as the gods commanded you, so everything shall return to the gods. Now lay it down and return to Olympus, to your father god's side. That is the best choice for you right now. Beneath the water, the ritual track had begun to revolve. A gateway was being opened. The souls of all life on the plane were imprisoned within the mortal realm, still lingering in the mortal world. Though Lane was not in the spirit realm, he could see that the large-scale death without the souls entering samsara had finally caught the attention of the three goddesses, who had begun to investigate the source of this phenomenon. So now, he preferred to wait for the situation to unfold. As for Triton, to Lane, he was no different from the bronze humans who had just died. As long as Triton retreated now, Lane wouldn't do anything. Clearly, that's what he thought, but Triton did not agree. I will report back to my father god, mortal, but that will be after dealing with the last two, Triton retorted. In the face of Lane's advice, Triton only scoffed. At first, he didn't necessarily want to exterminate every person, especially since the two in front of him might also be related to Prometheus. He could have offered the forethinking god a favor and left a few to survive, but now things were different. He knew the limitations the mortal world imposed on the gods, so Poseidon must have paid a price for attacking from afar. To lessen his father god's wrath later, Triton had no choice but to make the rest of the task as flawless as possible. Your companion has already been killed by my father god, and now, it's your turn. Triton leaned back and then threw with force, and the trident flew out. The remnants of divine power faintly locked onto the target. Triton believed mortals couldn't escape this kind of lock-on. Blame your bad luck, if anything. Prometheus is gone. With such power, wouldn't it be good to simply live well? Why insist on opposing me? Triton snorted coldly as he watched the trident cutting through the air, feeling equally displeased. No matter what, today's events were far from perfect. He needed to think about how to appease his father god's wrath. Chapter 288. The Rising Copper Pillar. The raging ocean waves surged as the trident hurtled through the sky. Between heaven and earth, countless beings saw this scene, yet no one reacted. They were all watching the spectacle, but in the eyes of different beings, the fools of this drama varied. Some saw humans, some saw divine children, and some saw directly the Olympian gods. Like now, in a corner underwater, where the black fog was gathering and dispersing unpredictably. Located at the heart of the ceremonial track, Mephisto let out an odd laugh. So, are all these noble by birth beings like this? Or is it just the ones I have seen? Lucky for him. If he were also a member of Silver Humanity, he probably wouldn't live past a month. The voice echoed in the pitch-black depths of the sea, but no one responded to him, because there were no living creatures here, only some transparent souls floating beside him. Those were the souls of the deceased, but they had long lost their consciousness. And except for a few beings, even if they were to be reborn in hell in the future, they would not have the chance to retain the memories of their past lives. According to the Lord of the Nine Hells, if all life could retain their memories when reincarnating, it would only sap hell's vitality. After all, what they were like before, they would likely be the same after reincarnation. Therefore, apart from the first batch of Silver Humanity, only those who proved their capabilities while alive are privileged to retain their memories, and the rest of the souls, they will forget everything about the past, becoming the bottom dwellers of hell, and then rise through fight and intrigue. Those who succeed are naturally talented. Those who die are simply remade. Conveniently, the river of oblivion flowing through the underworld can help the demons take care of this little matter. In such circumstances, a hell with limited soul sources can continue to develop and grow endlessly. I really wish all the deities were like this. How much less trouble that would save me. Unfortunately, the Divine King does have some skills, at least much stronger than that Sea Emperor. Chuckling softly, Mephisto didn't linger on this point and continued to focus on the enormous array that enveloped the city. He could feel that the will of the Lord of the Nine Hells was on the other side. Soon the passage would be opened. Just as the son of the Sea Emperor Triton said, "It's all about the connections in this world." Although Mephisto had prepared a gift for Olympus, he was certain this gift wouldn't be enough to stop all gods of Mount of the Gods. But the devil was not afraid. After all, his boss was reliable. Above the surface of the water, the trident came hurtling through the air, striking directly at Lane. Poseidon's divine power swirled around it, calming the very waves that had just submerged the entire city. As the ruler of the ocean, commanding the tides was only natural. Under the strike, Lane slowly extended his right hand. Extremely fast and extremely slow, the spear that cut through the space and the slowly rising arm formed an odd yet harmonious picture. Finally, the divine artifact and the slender fingers met in the same place, and the finger's owner grasped its edge. Whoosh! Seemed like a long time, yet it was only a moment. The azure glow that had just brightened on the trident due to divine power was extinguished in an instant. The sharp tip was clenched by 5 fingers, unable to advance an inch further. Only the excess energy vibrating from the divine artifact pressed upon the surrounding sea, demonstrating the hidden power beneath this seemingly ordinary action. The sea within 1,000 miles dipped slightly. In midair, Triton's smile froze on his face, not understanding what was happening. He hadn't made the same mistake twice in the same matter. He hadn't even approached the other. The trident still carried his father god's divine power, and even Prometheus himself would be wounded facing this attack, so what was happening now? Was the other a true god? But even if it was a deity, they would still need to use divine power to catch another god's weapon. And using divine power in the current world necessarily requires paying a price. But no matter how he looked, the figure in black before him didn't seem to have paid any price. With his mouth slightly open, Triton seemed to want to say something, but in the next moment, he felt an immense force surging from the void. The world seemed to reject him, and the platform of seawater at his feet immediately shattered. Almost instantly, he was slammed hard from the air to the sea's surface, crawling prostrate upon it. Triton felt as if he were shouldering a mountain, unable to move even a finger. "Wait, are you one of the reclusive ancient Titan gods? This is all a misunderstanding. I am the son of the Sea Emperor. The Divine King is my uncle. In fact, today I am acting on the will of the gods." Thud! Footsteps interrupted Triton's veiled threat. From the corner of his eye, He saw the hem of a robe as the unknown person walked up to him. No, not just him. There was another person. Triton could even hear the sound of a bronze knife scraping against stone, and he knew what that meant. This was a record documenting his current state. A surge of humiliation and anger arose within him. As a demigod, this was the very scene Triton least wanted to experience. Before a true god, he would always be so insignificant. And what was even more unbearable was the fact that his current state was being recorded. I don't blame you, Triton. Chapter 289. The voice came from above, and Triton breathed a sigh of relief. The other party was, after all, considering his father God. But the words that followed made his face turn a fierce red. You do not know my name, nor have you seen my power, so it's understandable that you raised a weapon against me. Now that you have seen my power and realized the gap between us, all you need to do is repent for your disrespect, and I will forgive your previous actions. Without glancing at the merman on the water's surface, Lane examined the divine artifact in his hand. Just as he said, one does not get angry over an ant's challenge because the ant simply cannot comprehend human greatness. If they possessed wisdom, they would naturally know to bow before humans, and so it is with the son of the sea god. So now, as long as Triton repented for his actions after realizing the reality, Lane would, as he said, not dwell on his previous behavior. But clearly, for some people, after just experiencing the power of a god, to repent in front of another true god is far more difficult to accept than suffering pain. He would rather endure torture than admit his weakness and ignorance before another deity. As for death, Triton didn't actually think he would die. The mortal before might indeed have killed him, since their understanding was different, and those ignorant know no fear, naturally capable of anything. But this strange true god in front of him, he would not just kill him like that. So at this moment, in front of Lane, Triton's blood rushed to his brain, and he almost blurted out words that he would regret for a lifetime. Release me. I am the son of the Sea Emperor. The deities are watching here. I am here by the command of my father God. The son of Poseidon will never repent. Only my father God has the right to discipline me. No matter who you are, you should not disgrace me in front of the deities. If you dare, just kill me. Then it shall be as you wish. The intense voice came to a sudden halt, and Triton lifted his head, looking at this unfamiliar deity. You said, what? I said, it shall be as you wish. Repeating it once more, Lane's gaze finally left the divine artifact. He looked down at this hybrid being of fish and deity. There was resentment in his eyes for not being a deity, hatred towards Lane, anger at the injustice of fate, shame for being oppressed by someone else, and confusion about the phrase, as you wish. The only thing missing was fear, because Triton believed, perhaps this unknown god would punish him in anger, but he would not kill him. But since the words had been spoken, Lane decided to fulfill his wish. Since you are so determined, you must also have the courage to face everything. I respect your courage and give you the end you requested, as you asked. With a slight smile, Lane gently swung the butt end of the trident. Closing his eyes, Triton clenched his teeth, ready to be tortured. But to his surprise, when the butt end of the divine artifact tapped his chest, it did not bring any pain. He felt himself moving backward. Space seemed to be shifting. The whistling of the wind arose in his ears. As if he had traversed a vast distance, at a certain moment Triton opened his eyes. He found himself flying through the sky at an unimaginable speed. Looking around, the land stretched out behind him, and he was moving deeper into the sea. This was a strange sea, nothing like the place of his birth. To the southwest, a massive shadow stood there, supporting both heaven and earth while simultaneously enduring the pressure they exerted on him. Is this the northwest of the land? Looking at all this, Triton was at first bewildered, then a bit gleeful. Although he had not stopped, that strange deity ultimately feared his father's name and dared not harm him. To be struck from the southeast of the continent into the northwest was indeed a show of immense divine power, but it was only a matter of saving face. Now, at the junction of the west and north, there shall be a column. What? At the edge of his vision, the vast sea surface began to churn. Where the glaciers of the northern sea met the undercurrents of the western sea, a hint of bronze gradually surfaced. First a speck, then like growth, a gigantic bronze pillar extended from the sea. The sky trembled for a moment because in the blink of an eye, this immense bronze pillar had propped up the sky, becoming another sky-bearing column beside the sky-bearing Titan. Almost visible to the naked eye, cracks began to spread upon the newly emerged bronze pillar. Atlas shrugged his shoulders as the pillar erected. He seemed to feel a bit relieved. Watching Triton speeding over from the distant sea, this Titan who would never submit to Olympus couldn't help but show an ironic smile. "Little fellow, what have you done to call upon such punishment?" Also, an ominous premonition came over him, and as the bronze pillar rushed closer, Triton seemed to understand something. "Yes, without you, how could a single bronze column possibly bear the weight of heaven? Punished me, punished my foolish brother. And now it's the turn of his own nephew, ha ha ha." Atlas, having recognized the bloodline of the person before him, the rebellious progeny of his king, laughed loudly, then looked towards the east, towards Olympus that stood in the distance from him. Chapter 290. Zeus, it seems even your throne is not so secure. Look, this is the fate of those who rebel. Yet there was no response, and Mount Olympus was dead silent, as if no gods existed there at all. Clang! Ah! The silent collision echoed against the bronze pillars, and with it, Triton's cry. Silver-white chains materialized out of nowhere, wrapping around 7 times, binding the half-fish, half-human demigod to the bronze pillar. In that moment, as the son of the sea god, he became a medium. He transferred the pressure of the sky onto the sea, and thus 3 parts of the northwest sea sank. Countless undercurrents formed a ring, turning this area of the ocean into a forbidden zone for ordinary beings. As this medium, Triton felt his body might be crushed into powder. He thought he was going to die, but as the offspring of the sea god, he could find vitality from the ocean. As long as he was not instantly annihilated, he could continuously recover, and after all, the piece of sky that had fallen onto the bronze pillar was only a small fringe. So even though Triton's body was covered in cracks like shattered porcelain, it never completely broke apart. Opening his mouth, but unable to breathe, Triton felt he had lost all perception of the outside world. But what followed, the deity's belated judgment, still imprinted deeply in his heart. "You wish for death, so I shall grant you death, but that is merely your desire, not the punishment for your offense against me." In the city ruins, Lane withdrew his right hand. "I shall hang you above the west heaven for 7,000 years, to serve as the support between heaven and earth. When the punishment I have prescribed ends, you will naturally face the end you sought." Suspending the son of the sea god above the sea was a fitting end indeed. "And you?" Raising his gaze, spanning mountains and seas, Lane saw the silent divine palace on Mount Olympus. The palace doors could not block his sight, and the subtle expressions of the gods were all different. "Take care of your belongings." A blue light streaked across the land, crossed the boundary between water and land, burst open the doors of the divine palace, and landed before Poseidon, trembling slightly. As Poseidon had once requested, this divine artifact, forged by godhood, had long since become an object bound to the ocean. Its power grew stronger as the area under its control expanded and would become utterly powerless if it lost its domain. Thus, like throwing out trash, the Sea Emperor's artifact was plunged before Poseidon's seat, marked only by the imprint of a handgrip, testifying to the events it had undergone. Within the great hall, the gods remained silent. The moment they fully realized Lane's presence, Zeus had guessed the outcome, yet he did not issue any warning. This was not to target his foolish brother, but to probe. In less than a century after opening the spirit realm, Lane had mysteriously appeared in human cities, undoubtedly proving the other party was not truly at peace with the world. And with Mother Earth about to awaken, she constantly threatened Zeus's further path. In such circumstances, the divine king was eager to know, do the laws of the present world have any effect on the primordial gods? Now, with the authority of the Divine King, he had his answer. Yet, seeing the shattered entrance and the artifact landed before Poseidon, Zeus could not be pleased. He had always known, to these great divine powers, divine court's dignity was a joke. But when the moment truly occurred, and the other party didn't consider his existence at all, Zeus still clenched the armrests of his throne. He did not know what the other deities were thinking, but right then he urgently wanted. His expression shifted, then immediately returned to normal. The Divine King, acting as if nothing had happened, looked at his brother who had finally quieted down. Humans have already been destroyed. As for the rest, let's leave it at that. Your own problems. Deal with them yourself. When the Divine King spoke, the gods all sighed in relief. The strange atmosphere was broken, but all the deities intentionally ignored the trident that was embedded in the divine palace. However, faced with Zeus's words, Poseidon remained unmoved. After staring for a moment at the divine artifact that was lost and found again, the blue hair concealed the Sea Emperor's expression. Nobody knew what he was thinking. They could only see Poseidon finally extending his hand, placing it on the clear imprint on the artifact. The next moment, wisps of black mist twined around Poseidon's palm, the force of death slicing open the principal god's flesh. Yet he seemed not to feel it, only staring for a moment before suddenly starting to laugh softly. Ha ha ha. Poseidon, perhaps you need to rest for a while? Watching the abnormal Poseidon, Zeus spoke indifferently. Rest? No need. Not only do I not need it, you don't either. Do you think you have calculated everything perfectly, that all is within your control? Zeus, you are actually just a joke. The laughter eventually ceased, and Poseidon looked at his younger brother. He might not be known for his wisdom, but he wasn't stupid. Zeus and his lover were the only two present who had seen Lane, yet they had just now unanimously chosen silence, standing by as Triton marched towards his destruction. So now it was his turn to disregard. What do you mean? Zeus's brow furrowed, and a bad premonition rose in his heart. The consecutive surprises today had already been headache-inducing enough. All he wanted now was to end it all smoothly. Nothing much, just a reminder. Zeus, and your weak lover, have you forgotten that you also have a father? At those words, Eurynom's expression changed dramatically, and Zeus finally remembered something. The god of the ocean, Oceanus, had intended to probe into Zeus's hidden human tribe more than a decade ago, but had never been fruitful. However, not long before, the sturdiest fortress had been breached from within. Under the covert guidance of a certain existence, the name of the god of the ocean began to spread among humans, and under the flood, the people realized that the Sea Emperor had brought disaster upon them, naturally turning to another sea god for protection. There was no protection to be had, but the faith was real enough, and so Oceanus finally became aware of the secret hidden by his adopted son. And now, in Poseidon's sensation, he and the primordial goddess of water were crossing the ocean, hurtling towards Olympus. At the same time, within the spirit realm, that should be enough. Enveloped in gray wings, the young deity stood up. The mysterious person had spoken truly. This was indeed a rare opportunity. Those who should have left had left, and now the spirit realm seemed much emptier. Especially so since the most threatening goddess of the nether moon wasn't there. That was the best news. As for the top tier of the spirit realm, at this moment it was completely deserted.